I believe if we were to come out with, in fact, we've either recovered a craft, which I think is more plausible, and that we've done some reverse engineering, maybe we don't control it, or what have you, I think they would have to, as Ronald Reagan said, we would all become, I'm paraphrasing what he said, we would all become a little more focused on uniting behind one issue than we would behind, you know, the boogeyman overseas, whoever that is this year. So, you know, I think it's a complex situation, but I believe we've really, we've got to start pushing the envelope. We got to start asking tough questions, and I was very disappointed in the committee, in that hearing.
So, you know, just to kind of line you out, and I'm sure I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know or at least have heard, but the people that really study the field, and I've taken a very journalistic, scientific approach for going on 15 years now that I've been pursuing this. I've been shooting interviews with people over and over again, some very high up. I've interviewed Lou, I've interviewed Christopher Mellon, who basically admitted to me that there's a team studying crash debris. You know, this thing back in the Roswell time, whatever happened was the kind of the beginning of it all. Shortly after Roswell, they formed a group to sequester this and study it. Some people call it MJ-12, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But it was some kind of a group whose job it was to discredit the field and take this thing deep into private industry and very compartmentalized stovepiped government programs. And then they did Project Blue Book as a public whitewash of the whole thing. They did a couple of hearings, and then supposedly for 40, 50 years, nothing happened until OSOP, which turned into ATIP, started. Now, we all know that that's not true. I have interviewed Colonel John Alexander, who was running programs to study UFOs in between Blue Book and the other, and he told me that they had constant contact with UFOs. They studied the nuclear incident at Maelstrom in detail. He was the guy that ran that program that did that study. Right. So when we have Mr. Bray going, oh, I don't know, and then we have, what was the other guy's name? I always mispronounce it. He's the current Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, Moultrie or something like that. Yeah. When he said that there's no materials, okay, we know better. We know for a fact that materials of unknown origin with isotopic ratios that cannot be produced on planet Earth were studied at Bigelow Aerospace under a government contract that was issued back in the OSOP time. We know who studied them. We know it was scientists like Jim Lataski. We know Hal Puthoff was involved. And we know that this stuff all happened, and it's all being denied now. We know that certain members of Congress were given a briefing by Eric Davis, who was the half of the Wilson-Davis memo, showing them that there were materials from unknown craft being studied, showing them slides talking about non-planetary origin. So for this guy to say, well, we don't have this stuff, is nonsense. We have a Freedom of Information Act request where they actually talked about the kind of materials they are. They talked about what they may be able to do, things like metallic glass and materials that diffuse light and compress electromagnetic energy. And the Pentagon, as soon as the FOIA request came out, the Pentagon, Susan Guff, immediately walked it back and said, oh no, that's all programs that we're doing. But the reports all talk about materials that they can't say what they're actually going to be used for. So we're talking about very, very advanced materials that the people studying them can't speculate about how they're going to be used. So nobody creates a material and then figures out what to do with it. So we know that 40 years of whitewashing.
Sure.
And so we also know that this new narrative that rolled out in 2017 with Lou as the front guy, we're just starting to look at this stuff. You know, I've got Lou, I interviewed Lou in 2018, and that's what he said. He says, well, you know, government and industry is just now starting to kind of look at this seriously, when he knows perfectly well they've been looking at it for 40 years. And so this, we call it the new narrative, and the new narrative is, it ended with Blue Book, started back up with OSOP, nothing in between, nothing to see here. And that's the story that we're rolling out to the public. And Andre Carson, at the beginning of the hearing, told that story. He literally opened up the hearing saying, Blue Book ended, nothing happened, ATIP started, it happened again. So there seems to be a concerted effort to whitewash this period in between. When we know that leaps and bounds in technology have been discovered, material sciences, technological breakthroughs by independent aerospace and by government. So I'm sure you're up to speed on most of that stuff. How do you feel about the new narrative, and what do you think we need to do to break through it and get attention back on what's really happened?
It's going to take somebody at the executive level to do it, or there's going to be a incredible leak somewhere that somebody's conscience, and they don't end up, you know, committing suicide by 12 bullet holes to the back of the head kind of thing. I think, you know, because I believe that it's just a complete cover-up. There's no other reason for it, and it deals with power and greed, and that's the name of the game in Washington. Staying in power, regardless. They can run the country into a rat hole. It's basically what we're doing.